What's wrong with you people?
Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast. I am Kyle, non-alcoholic beerman, and I'm joined today by, well, nobody. It is just me today. Matt is involved in a Send Network church planter assessment today, and so much like his beloved Houston Astros, he is out today. So sadly, I don't get to rag on him in person for his Astros being summarily dispatched from the American League wildcard series so quickly. So we'll have to save that for another day. But yes, just like my Texas Rangers, the Houston Astros are now in off-season mode. And the Detroit Tigers go on. Hey, thank you for joining us today. Since Matt's gone, I wanted to take just some time and talk through something that's really near to my heart. And obviously, throughout the last week, we've been hearing a lot about Hurricane Helene and the devastation that hit really across the southeast part of our country. And today, talk about how you can be involved in praying, certainly for those who've been affected, how you can be involved in giving, and then how you can be involved maybe even in going and serving in some of the affected areas. Let me just tell you a little bit of my history with disaster relief. In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina hit, I had the opportunity to go and serve for a week in Alexandria, Louisiana, on a meal unit out of First Baptist Church in Plains, Texas. I was a youth and music minister in West Texas at the time, and I'd heard about disaster relief that Texas had done. I'd seen them serving in a mission trip that we once held down at South Padre Island. The disaster relief team served late night pancakes till like 4 a.m. And so I knew that these things existed, but I really didn't know what was involved. And after Hurricane Katrina hit, they were really doing this kind of mass asking anyone who was available and able to come and serve, be trained, and then be sent to serve. And so a group of us from the church where I was serving at the time, First Baptist Church in Crosbyton, Texas, we drove about 90 miles or so to Plains, Texas on a Saturday and went through this 2-hour training. I heard all about their mill unit and how it was run. And then at the end of the day, they said, oh, by the way, we hope to get you all scheduled at some point to go down and serve as in some of the recovery efforts. But we have a spot available for a group who's going tomorrow. This was on a Sunday or on a Saturday. So there was a group leaving on Sunday afternoon, and they had a slot available. And so this was before the days of text messaging, at least the wide text messaging like we have today. So I got on the phone, called my wife, and I just said, hey, they have a spot for tomorrow. I'd have to leave right after church. And she said, do it. So that Sunday morning, got up, taught Sunday school as the youth minister, led music as the worship minister, and then caught a caravan heading to Alexandria, Louisiana. We drove what was about 12 hours, got to Alexandria very early the next morning, and then I spent one of the longest weeks of my life and the hottest weeks of my life serving meals in a tent outside, standing over these enormous pots where we would cook lunch and dinner for several thousand people. And it was a long, miserable, hot week, but we understood that we were doing something valuable for folks who had been displaced from their home in New Orleans and were living essentially in the convention center there in Alexandria for weeks until it was safe to go back to New Orleans. So that was my first experience with disaster relief. And then fast forward several years, I was the disaster relief coordinator for our association in New Mexico. We had a brand new laundry unit that we built that had, I believe, 5 washers and 6 dryers. Just a cool trailer that you had to just do laundry for workers we were set up to do laundry for some folks in the neighborhood, and we got deployed down to Orange, Texas after Hurricane Harvey hit down there. And what happened with Harvey was this storm. The hurricane itself wasn't all that bad, but it stalled out and just dumped massive amounts of rain on the Houston and Southeast Texas region. I mean, we're talking like 60 inches of rain over the course of 2 or 3 days. And so folks that had never had water come up like over their curb suddenly had 3 feet of water in their house. And it didn't matter. I mean, we worked in houses that were probably right at the poverty level, and we worked in houses that were probably worth $700,000 or $800,000. There was no discrimination by neighborhood. The entire town of Orange was a mess, and so we were able to set up this laundry unit that we had in this church parking lot, and like I said, did laundry primarily for the workers who were there, doing clean out, mud out, and come back with all sorts of disgustingness on their clothes. And then we were actually able to open it up and do some laundry for some folks in the neighborhood as well that were relying on laundromats, or some of them were just kind of washing their clothes like in their tubs as they had a chance. And it was a very different kind of disaster relief experience. Not nearly as miserable as standing over a giant pot of boiling food, but still some long hours, and just I remember getting to serve and hear these folks' stories, and getting to visit with folks who were obviously just in some just in despair because they knew they lost their house. They didn't know what was next for them, and then some who not just because they had financial resources to help care for themselves better, but lots of folks who had faith in Christ already, and they understood that even though some of their earthly possessions were gone, their identity was secure in Christ, and just getting to have all kinds of conversations of bringing help and healing and some hope to these folks. And so the reason I wanted to talk about that today, obviously, if you've followed the news at all on Hurricane Helene and the way that it hit the southeast part of our United States, especially a lot of the stories I'm hearing out of like the area around Asheville, North Carolina, are just heartbreaking. So far, we know that there have been, I believe the news today reported somewhere right around 200 deaths. There will be more coming. That's just what they've been able to confirm so far. There's still millions of people without power, hundreds of roads destroyed. I know a stretch of I-40 is probably going to be out of service at least until next year. Lots of other infrastructure damage. And so these folks are really struggling. And I read one news story today that was just talking about because of the landscape there in Appalachia, and the fact that there are so many houses that are spread out in the mountains. It's really hard to know exactly how many people are displaced, how many people are without power, and quite frankly, how many deaths there are, because there's so many people that live out in the middle of nowhere, and it's now very hard to get there. So I just wanted to share a little bit as Southern Baptists, how we get to be involved in this. We'll put some of these resources in the show notes that I think will be very helpful. So North Carolina Baptists, led by our friend Todd Unzicker there as the executive director, treasurer. We're so grateful for Todd and his leadership in this time. And our friend J. Allen Murray is the president of North Carolina Baptists right now, so I know that he is leading through this as well. And they put out a resource that simply calls people to pray, give, and go. And so to pray, look, you can do that in any way. Pray personally, you can pray corporately with your church, send relief, put together a prayer guide. We'll put this in the show notes, but I wanted to just kind of walk through some of this. Pray for the families and the survivors. Quite frankly, there's physical healing and there is comfort that needs to be brought to families. Some who have been injured through the storms, some who are dealing with lost loved ones, lost homes, and lost livelihoods. many of whom their names we will never know. But we can still pray for those who lost loved ones, who lost their homes, who lost their livelihoods, that the Lord would be near, that those ministering on the ground would have the opportunity to share with them and to bring the hope of the gospel there. Secondly, you can pray for the restoration of basic needs like access to food, clean water, medication, other essential supplies for those cut off by damaged roads and infrastructures. As I said, the terrain there is so rugged and some of the roads have been washed out. So, I mean, the folks are literally getting supplies dropped to them by helicopter, and that's their only contact with the outside world at this point. And then simply pray for strength and hope for the survivors as they navigate this road to recovery. They rebuild their lives after this widespread destruction. Then you want to pray for the first responders and the volunteers. Obviously, those first responders who are going in and encountering dead bodies and seeing the destruction for the first time. That's going to take an emotional and a spiritual toll on them. So pray for strength and compassion for those who go in. Pray for resilience for those who are having to deal and work with dangerous conditions, collapsed roads, collapsed bridges, flooded towns, and then just the human destruction that they're dealing with. And also pray for the volunteers who will be there long term. Because as we mentioned, this is not going to be a short recovery process. This is going to be a long, months long, probably years long process to recovery. And so there will be volunteers who are there for a long time, and they're going to be hearing heartbreaking stories of folks who lost everything and folks who lost loved ones. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in that spot before, that does take a toll on you when you're just hearing story after story after story of loss and hopelessness. So pray that these volunteers would go in with a heart of compassion to hear, with a heart to share the hope of the gospel with those that they encounter. And then pray for the local churches and the communities. Many churches have been impacted by this, church buildings destroyed, pastors who've lost everything. I remember in Orange, in the church that we were staying in, the church did not have a lead pastor at the time, so there was an associate who was there and kind of overseeing the ministries of the church. And in the meantime, a school had moved in to their church facility because the school had flooded. And so this associate pastor who was kind of keeping things running at the church, both he and his in-laws had their homes flooded. And so while he's trying to keep the ministries of the church going, then he goes home at the end of the day and they're working on getting their houses back together. And if I remember correctly, I don't remember the guy's name, but I remember that he their in-laws' house was not in as bad a shape, so they got it fixed, and everybody moved in there. While then they would go in the evenings and work on their own house. So he was keeping this ministry going, and in a way where there were disaster relief volunteers and an elementary school that was meeting in their church. And then he was still dealing with the personal side of, having lost his own home and repairing that. And that's the reality of what these churches and pastors will be dealing with. Trying to minister to the community around them while still having to deal with their own personal losses and rebuilding issues as well. And so we want the churches there to be a beacon of hope, offering comfort, meals, shelter, and of course the gospel. And pray that there'd be an openness to the gospel in these communities, where maybe it's been hard soil up to this point, that this would provide an opportunity to share about the hope of the gospel. And then pray for the government and the local leaders. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made, oftentimes without a lot of information, and millions upon millions upon millions of dollars of resources that will be sent out. And so pray that the leaders would have wisdom to know how to navigate those, how best to use the monies that are available to them. And then this prayer guide closes with Psalm 46. It just says this: God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swellings. This is a great verse to pray. Maybe when you don't know what else to pray for those who are on the ground, going through just this devastating experience, this is a great, God is our refuge and strength. God be a refuge and strength to them. So that's how you can pray. Secondly, you can give. And again, we'll put links to the North Carolina Baptists giving portal that they've set up. Send Relief also has a giving portal where you can give. And all those resources will go to help the teams on the field, help meet the needs that exist right now. So none of those funds that are given for disaster relief go to administrative costs. Those go straight to helping people on the ground. And then lastly, go. If you are able, I know states all across the country right now are deploying their disaster relief teams. They're probably holding disaster relief trainings right now because they're going to need more volunteers. So get in touch with your local association or your state convention's disaster relief coordinator and ask how you can be involved, how you can get trained to go and serve. Maybe that's in the short term. Maybe that's next year, because as I said, this recovery effort is going to be a long process as we, as these folks in the southeastern and eastern seaboard work to recover what this storm, the devastation that this storm brought. And so, for your churches, again, you have some ways to pray there for the folks that have experienced this. Give. Maybe you lead your churches to give. Maybe you talk a little bit about the work that disaster relief is doing in your state, and you take up a special love offering. And then maybe you need to go, or you need to call some folks in your church to go and be a part of this. Listen, it's a long week or two if you go and serve, but I can also tell you it is worth it, and you see the impact of Southern Baptists. Southern Baptists have, I believe it's the third largest disaster relief organization after the Red Cross and the Salvation Army. So whenever you're watching a news story, if you ever see folks in yellow shirts, yellow hats, yellow jackets in the background, those are Southern Baptists who are on the ground working in the disaster relief in the response. And so again, see how you and your church can be involved. At the very least, you can pray, you can probably give, and then some can go. Hey, I know this is a little bit shorter than normal. Just wanted to give you some resources there and to remind you to keep the folks who have been affected by Helene in your prayers, and see how you and your church can be involved. Thanks for listening, and until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
What's wrong with you people?